If Bill Barr was your first attorney general, would there have been a Mueller probe and a Russia hoax?
No, there wouldn't be. He would have stopped it immediately. He saw it immediately. He would have seen it immediately. Jeff Sessions was a disaster. I made him. I didn't want to make him attorney general, but he was the first senator to endorse me. So I felt a little bit of an obligation. He came to see me 4 times, just begging me to be attorney general. He wasn't, to me, equipped to be attorney general, but he just wanted it. He was from a state that I love, Alabama. I won Alabama by a tremendous margin. He wanted it. And I said, all right, Jeff, he was a smaller version of that in Alabama for a little while. He was a very average guy, I find out. But if he goes in, he was so bad in his nomination, proceedings. I should have gotten rid of him there. But every time the word Russia, he knew less about Russia than I did. He knew nothing about Russia. And Jeff was just very weak and very sad. And when the name Russia was mentioned, just the word Russia, he immediately, instead of being a man and saying, this is a hoax, he recused himself, and he had a deputy named Rod Rosenstein who probably, you'll see things coming out. But I learned a lot from Richard Nixon. Don't fire people. I learned a lot. I study history. And the firing of everybody, I should have in one way, but I'm glad I didn't, because look at the way it turned out. They were all a bunch of crooks and they got caught. But I learned a lot by watching Richard Nixon. Of course, there was one big difference. Number one, he may have been guilty, and number two, he had tapes all over the place. I wasn't guilty. I did nothing wrong, and there are no tapes. But I wish there were tapes in my case. But learn a lot from Richard Nixon. And you don't do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that declaring I've learned a lot from Richard Nixon on how to cover up crimes is the move here. This is Trump calling into Fox and Friends, coincidentally at the same time that a jobs report was being released showing that 20.5 million jobs were lost in April alone, and that the unemployment rate is now at 14.7%. I'm not saying he was trying to distract his audience, but yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because, of course, rather than facing the reality that was brought about by this administration's failed response to the virus, Trump opted to harken back to his greatest hits, because what else is there to talk about right now other than the Russia probe? He spends his time railing against Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the investigation. Only Trump seems to not understand that Sessions had a legal obligation to recuse himself. He was a campaign surrogate throughout the race and served as chairman of the campaign's National Security Advisory Board. He also came under scrutiny for failing to disclose meetings he had with then Russian Ambassador Kislyak during the campaign. And yet the investigation was looking into possible collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign during this time. Sessions couldn't oversee an investigation that he himself was involved in. And DOJ regulations are crystal clear about that, stating, quote, "No DOJ employee may participate in a criminal investigation or prosecution if he has a personal or political relationship with any person or organization substantially involved in the conduct that is the subject of the investigation or prosecution, or who would be directly affected by the outcome." In other words, it would have been against DOJ regulations for Sessions to oversee an investigation headed by the FBI, which he, as Attorney General, was in charge of when that investigation literally involved his own activities. And yet that Trump wanted him to anyway should probably give you an indication of his commitment to the rule of law. As far as the Nixon comparison goes, it's pretty telling that Trump's main takeaway here is don't fire people because they'll flip on you and expose your illegal behaviors, and not, don't commit crimes. If you asked any other president, any other person, what the takeaway from the Nixon administration would be, it is not to break the law. But the fact that Trump saw it as making sure you have a loyal circle who won't rat you out pretty much speaks volumes. And so that is why this administration wasn't assembled because it's qualified, it's clearly not, but rather based on loyalty to Trump. That's why we have Ivanka Trump, who makes handbags representing the United States at the UN. That's why we have Jared Kushner, a failed real estate developer, overseeing key elements of the US response to a pandemic. And that's why the top health and human services official overseeing the coronavirus task force was a former Labradoodle breeder. It's not about qualifications, it's about their willingness to bend the knee to Trump. Trump, which might give some insight into why just about every other country on the face of the earth has managed to contain the spread and push down the number of cases, while the United States is still, in May, seeing cases spike when you take out the declining number of cases from New York. This is what happens when you're being led by sycophants and not experts. So while Trump may have, quote, learned a lot from Nixon, he apparently missed the most important lesson, and that is to realize when it's over. At least Nixon had the self-awareness to recognize when he'd been caught committing crimes. At least he had the self-awareness to acknowledge that continuing to serve would only diminish trust in our institutions and the office of the presidency, and that he would do more harm than good by being there. But Trump isn't one for self-awareness, and even though his presidency is nothing more than an assault on the values of this country, he wouldn't dare acknowledge that because he's only here to service his own ego. So rest assured, as midterms had shown in 2018 and as 2020 will show too, this president is just a sinking ship who will drag the rest of his party down with him.